Negotiations are not always going to be a win-win. In as much as you may go into a negotiation with that approach in mind, you're like, I'm going to be, don't want to be distributive, I don't want to be adversarial, I want to be collaborative, okay? I want us to get a win. I win, you win, we are happy. As much as you may want that, it's not always the case that that is how negotiations are going to be. Just because you're using that approach doesn't mean that the person is going to be using the same approach. In fact, even win-win negotiations, okay, have some aspect of losses. The point is that you need to know some strategies to defend yourself or to be defensive. I don't mean defensive in a negative sense, but I mean, so that you don't get taken advantage of in negotiation. And in this video, we're going to talk about 3 such strategies that you need to learn so that each time you're negotiating, just have those in mind and, well, you don't get easily taken advantage of. But before we talk about that, here's a quick thing. You can actually access all this stuff. Talking about video lessons, PDF, downloadable PDF, practice exercises relating to things like managing contractual risks, contract management, supply chain management, negotiation, okay? All that stuff, you can access them at zeritenetwork.com. So just go to zeritenetwork.com once you're done and then see what you like and get that. I've also added a link talking about commercial negotiation. If you're interested in that, it's going to be in the video description. Now let's talk about whatever you're supposed to talk about in this video. So in this case, defensive strategies in negotiation. Defensive strategy number 1, prepare and then prepare some more. As simple as that sounds, most people just walk into negotiation and then say, let's see how things go. And the reality is, if you fail to prepare, just preparing to fail. That's pretty much, something along those lines. So you always need to have a plan. You always need to prepare because the reverse is true. You are preparing to fail. So from a negotiation perspective, the question then can be, what exactly are we supposed to be focusing on here when you're preparing? And there are a number of things, okay? The first of which is something like your walk-away position. In short, your best alternative for the negotiated agreement or BATNA. Because things don't always go according to plan when you're negotiating. That could be the case. And so you need to be in a position to walk away, because if you cannot walk away, if you can't walk away, if you can't say no, in fact, then you're not going to be in a position to negotiate. Because for you to negotiate, you must be willing to accept that there are things they might say which I don't like, and this is what I'm going to do if they say that. So before you go for a serious negotiation, you have to create a list of alternatives showing how you can get what you want. Okay, alternatives are important. You evaluate the alternatives so that you know which one works. Establish your BATNA based on the evaluation, and then calculate your reservation value. That is the lowest valued deal you are willing to accept. Otherwise, you just walk away if they don't give you that. So in short, this is how low I'm going to go. Anything below that, no. Okay? Now, in addition to knowing your walkaway position, your BATNA, you also need to know the zone of possible agreement. In short, ZOPA. Okay? And with a zone of possible agreement or zone of potential agreement, if you want, you need to remember these. Let's say something like buying and selling. So the supplier and the buyer. Let's talk about that sort of relationship. You see, the thing you have to understand about that is that when it comes to something like a price, okay, this is how ZOPA works. There is a price point. In fact, think of it this way. If you're the buyer, then you want something, you might say, this is how low I'm going to go and this is how high I'm willing to spend. The same goes for the supplier. This is how low, the lowest price I'm willing to accept. And of course, there is the highest price. And from a seller's perspective, then that number can be as high as they want. So how exactly does ZOPA come into? So if you're willing to spend 50 to 70, in this case, I'm assuming you're the buyer, and the seller is willing to accept 60 to 80, then your ZOPA is between 60 to 70. That is your zone of potential agreement. What exactly does that mean? Is what that means, okay? Your zone of possible agreement, the area between which you can agree, the range of agreement in that negotiation in terms of how much the price in this case is going to be the minimum amount the supplier is willing to accept. Okay, so between the minimum amount the supplier is willing to accept and the maximum amount the buyer is willing to pay. So if the supplier, the minimum amount the supplier can accept is 70, and the maximum amount the buyer can spend is 60, then you see there is no agreement, because the highest you're willing to spend as the buyer, that is not even the lowest the supplier is willing to accept. So you can't have a deal. Okay? But if the lowest the supplier is willing to accept is 70 and the highest you're willing to spend is 80, then the deal falls between 70 and 80. So in between there, you can have a deal. Anyway, the point is just for you to go with that in mind. So one, understand your walkaway position, your button, okay, your best alternative to the negotiated agreement. Number two, understand, okay, prepare for the zone of possible agreement. The agreement can fall in between here. So have that in mind. Of course, the other thing you also need to have in mind as part of preparing, okay, because you need to prepare, is all the relevant issues, okay, at stake. So investigate all the relevant issues at stake surrounding the negotiation. Now, number two, or the defensive negotiation strategy 2, is separate information from influence. That is important, okay? Look at it this way. When you're negotiating, there are things you're saying. Those things, some of them are just information. And some of them are also intended to influence the other party. And the truth is also about, okay, that other party. Okay, the other party also, there are things they're saying. Some of those things are intended to just be information, and some of them are intended to influence you so that you can arrive at, or so that you can make a certain decision. So the key thing here is knowing the difference, okay, knowing what exactly is information and what exactly is persuasion, okay, something intended to change how I think. In fact, to understand these, let's look at a practical example. So in this case, let's assume that you're negotiating with a supplier, and the supplier claims that raw material costs have surged by 20%. So we have no choice but to increase prices by 15%. Okay, now that statement, what exactly are you going to do with it? Well, two things. One, you need to ask yourself, or rather you need to identify what is information. And these are going to be the objective facts. So things like, what is your research on the market about raw material telling you? Are alternative suppliers experiencing the same? And that just goes to tell you that you really need to be prepared when you're negotiating, because, that's why we said prepare. Because if you don't even know whatever you're negotiating about, you don't even know what other suppliers are, charging and the market information on that thing. Then when they tell you something like, hey, it has gone up by 20% and therefore you need to increase it, you're like, yeah, okay, yeah, sure. But now you start by doing that. Do your research. Number two, identify the influence part, okay, so the persuasion techniques. Now the phrase, no choice but to increase prices, is an attempt to phrase the situation as non-negotiable. That is number one. You also need to understand that the 15% increase may or may not actually be what the market data shows. So if it is not what the market data shows, you have a room for compromise. And also the urgency in their tone may be a tactic to prevent deeper analysis of the situation. So that is that's what you figure out, okay? So you've seen that. Now, knowing those two things, knowing that, okay, this part of the information is actually just, this part of what they've said is actually just information, and this other part is actually intended to persuade me, what do you do with that? How do you respond? So your response could be something like this. We understand raw materials prices have fluctuated. However, our research shows the increase is closer to 10% for your key inputs. Let's discuss how we can share the burden, perhaps through bulk ordering or extended contract terms to offset the costs. What exactly are you doing there? Telling them that, look, yeah, I get what you said. And are these what I've figured out? And no, I'm not backing out. I'm willing to work with you to solve this problem so that we can both gain out of it. So do we renegotiate the contract terms, extend them, or do we just buy more and spread the cost over time? So see, that's the thing. That's something you need to know. Defensive negotiation strategy 3, rephrase the other side's offer by removing the influence and see how it sounds. And that is important, because if their influence, okay, their persuasion tactics are strong and they're working on you, then you might get the message and think, well, it's actually very urgent. So you just want to rephrase it. I mean, here's an example. So if they say something like, I'd like you to agree to this proposal because I think it's fair, then read this as, I'd like you to agree to this proposal. And after you've done that, you're just ignoring the fair part. And then decide for yourself, is it fair? Is it not fair? So that's the point here. You always want to do that. I mean, if somebody says, this is the price and we think this price is reasonable, then just, this is the price. That is what you focus on, the number they've given you, and then decide for yourself. If somebody else pays this price over a long time, depending on how long you're planning to be in that deal, is that reasonable? So what are you doing? You are getting rid of the persuasive tactics and just looking at the information itself, okay? And making a decision based on that information. Because, again, look, negotiation is all about persuasion. And so if you're immune to their persuasion techniques, then yeah, that means, you just get information and deciding based on the information. Am I going to do this thing or am I not going to do that particular thing? In addition to all these, remember the following whenever you're negotiating. Number one, always go for a negotiation with a list of questions rather than a list of arguments. That is important, because if you just go there to argue, then on the other hand, if you have questions, like, yes, something is wrong, but then you phrase it as a question, then you might actually surprise the other party. You might actually say something, they might actually perceive you as a smart person, and then you might probe them to, share some information that you didn't even know. This is why you see some of these smart interviewers. They don't even have to be smart, just good interviewers, okay? They don't just like ask a question and then go to the next question. I mean, you can tell, okay? Most of the time they do listening, okay? They do more listening to the host, to the guest, and then they just probe. So it's the same thing when you're negotiating, okay? Number two, always practice. Don't wait until you have a serious negotiation to start working on your verbal and non-verbal skills. That is the reason why it is a small negotiation. If you're negotiating for routine products, okay, or routine items, you just want to take it as seriously as if you're negotiating for something big. So not like when you have like this strategic, okay, as opposed to tactical negotiation. If you're dealing in strategic negotiation, that's when you start practicing. How does my tonal variations? No, start early. Practice, okay? Number three, never be in a hurry to deliver your viewpoint. Instead, simply say, thanks for helping me understand. And then wait and see what the other party does, okay? So, do they continue talking? Do they reveal something that you didn't know? See, these are tips that are intended to help you. Now remember, all this stuff and many more. You can access all this stuff and many more in our website, zeratenetwork.com. You can get video lessons, you can get PDF downloads, you can get practice exercise. Just check it out. And also, I've added a link to commercial negotiation, which you can access. So check out the video description. And in the meantime, if you have any question, let me know. See you in the next video.